Welcome to the Exam Room Podcast, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hello, I'm the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so very much for watching and downloading in more than 150 countries around the world and making the Exam Room one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. And today we kind of get a double dose of excellence because not only are we going to be talking about our favorite plant-based foods, but we're also going to be talking about the great impact that they can have on the environment. And our guest today is a return guest, one of my favorite cookbook authors and a phenomenal chef, Cathy Katin-Grazzini. She is with us. Her new book is Love the Foods That Love the Planet, Recipes to Cool the Climate and Excite the Senses. What a great book title, Cathy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I mean, I really do. That title just zings to me. Recipes to Cool the Climate and Excite the Senses. Doesn't that just kind of fill you up and make you feel good?
Well, it's pretty exciting for cooking for the planet, and there's so much that we can do to make it really, really delicious. So that's what I'm all about.
And let's talk about this. I love the book. I love the recipes that are in there, but let's kind of set the table and connect some dots here for people who aren't really aware of the enormous connection that is their diet, what they're eating, and the environment. So we hear so much about global warming. Obviously, we're seeing destruction from Mother Nature on levels that we have not really seen before. When it comes to just how big of a pickle we're in, Cathy, from your vantage point, how big is said pickle?
Yeah, well, we're in a big pickle, as you put it right now. So, here's, we'll talk about some of the more ominous things, and then we'll talk about really hopeful things and things that we all can do to really make an impact. But global warming is accelerating right now. 2024 is the hottest year on record, and this is coming on the heels of 9 previous record-breaking years. So if the trajectory of where we're headed is just really not looking good right now. And this is because fossil fuel burning, which overheats the planet, is accelerating too. The demand for oil and gas is just going up and up. And so even though there's lots that is exciting that's happening on the green energy front, is just not keeping pace right now. So it's a sort of grim situation. There was a report that was just out a couple of weeks ago called the 2024 State of the Climate Report, put together by leading scientists, climatologists all over the world. And it was very ominous this year in particular, because we're pushing nature. We're getting up to a point right now in the temperature rise, and we're seeing it all around us. And this is just beginning, where we're pushing nature to her very limits. We're right on the precipice of some dire consequences. They put it that that we're facing right now some irreversible climate disasters that could imperil the very fabric of life on the planet. So it is pretty daunting. We are moving in the right direction. The problem that we have is just like we're not moving quickly enough.
Right.
And that's where all of us as individuals can really play a pivotal role, I believe. And that's why I wrote the book, because this is we can have an enormous impact. And I'll explain the food and how food comes into it if you want.
For sure. I think that that's a really great place for us to take the conversation, is the role of food here. People think about greenhouse gas emissions. They think about cars. They think about airplanes. They think about garbage. They think about those types of things, but they're not really thinking about what it is that they're eating. How significant of a role does our standard American diet play in the acceleration of global warming?
Yeah. This was so mind-blowing to me. So, when I started looking into this a couple of years ago, because I was just growing so anxious and concerned about what was happening to people's lives and livelihoods all over the world, I didn't know I knew there was a role, I just didn't know what it was, but it really was kind of mind-blowing for me. So the food sector globally accounts for over a third of total greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. That's a really big piece of the climate puzzle. I thought that eating locally was about the best thing I could do to really do my bit for the climate. But it turned out that whether it's organic or conventional or free range or not, if people are eating meat or any of that, is really small potatoes, transportation included. What really is provoking all of those greenhouse gas emissions comes from how we're using the land. Are we deforesting? Are we cutting swaths of virgin jungle and forest for agriculture and for other purposes? How the crops that we do grow, and or if it's livestock agricultural, what are the farming practices and how intensive or unsustainable are they in terms of their use of energy, the use of fertilizers, the use of other soil amendments, irrigation practices, and on, of farm equipment and how they're powered. Because right now, almost everything is still powered by fossil fuels. So all of those inputs have any, those two things, plus the fact that, and this really blew my mind, that over a third of all the food that we produce in the world is lost and wasted all along the supply chain. So there's so much that we can do as well. It ends up in landfills and generates methane, which is a really toxic greenhouse gas. So, the food system has an enormous impact. And what we're eating specifically really matters when it comes to those emissions. So as some of our viewers may know or may not, that livestock is right at the top of that list. Ruminant animals, beef cattle, dairy cattle, and cheese production, mutton and lamb, pork and poultry, fish, whether it's farmed or not farmed, all of those are very, very high, starting with beef is the main, it's the biggest of them all, but they all have a major impact. But what people may not realize, especially those that are already not eating meat, let's say, is that there are many plant-based commodities as well that are very high emitters of greenhouse gases because they're grown so unsustainably. So that was a surprise to me, because if you're eating for the planet, you're already eating plants, you're ahead of many people. And the more we can move in that direction, because plants and fruits and fungi are generally speaking very low emitting and really can reduce pressures on the planet, but not categorically. We have to pay attention to where those products are, what countries they're coming from. And the US is not the best in many regards, although in some cases it's fine. But we just have to become more aware of how we source some of our ingredients, because it can make all the difference.
Let me ask you this. I want to go back to what it was you were saying about a third of food being lost in the supply chain. Does that include the food that we buy and then we just don't get around to eating and we throw it out? Or is that just literally a third getting from whatever farm to the grocery store?
Yeah, it's all the way across. So that's a great question. It's all the way across the supply chain. So some of it is lost right, where it's produced. Some of it is lost along the way. There is a role, certainly, that consumers play, and I'll talk about that a little more, because I have advice in the cookbook. I spent some time focusing on what we as home cooks can do to minimize our loss, our contribution to loss and waste all along the supply chain. And then, restaurants and corporate uses of food as well. Too much of it is ending up either lost or ending up in the landfill when it really doesn't need to be. So we can't control all of that, but we can control what we control. So, for example, we should, when we're shopping, we should purchase what we know that we can consume within the lifespan of that product. So don't overbuy, buy as you need to. When we're cooking and plating our foods, don't pile up your plate if you can't finish it's better to go back for seconds if you want, because that will end up in the garbage as well. Label our foods when we're cooking them. this is such an easy thing to do. I have a little bit of masking tape and my magic, a small marker that I date my foods with, because plant-based foods, for the most part, have a shelf life, and once they're cooked, of about 5 days, sometimes a little more, in the fridge, and then they begin to degrade, and there's microbial, effects, so it spoils. So date things so that you can use your foods up um, in the order in which you need to, so that you're not wasting it. And then, you know, even more, I'm hoping people, and I have recipes to help people with this, but we can think more creatively about the foods, the parts of foods that we just toss or we waste because we don't know how to repurpose them. So there's lots of things we can do to repurpose our foods if our food is getting too soft to really enjoy munching raw. We can cook them up deliciously into sauces or compotes or in baked goods. Our food scraps, are delicious when we can cook them up into stocks for soups or sauces to sauce our other items that we're eating on the plate. When we're looking for sauces, really flavorful, and we often just toss them away. I even sort of recoup my I don't eat much cold cereal, but occasionally I have shredded wheat, for example. And if I do, in the bottom of those bags, are also shreds of shredded wheat that, like, what are you going to do? I mean, it's like, 20-30% of what's in the package. Don't throw that away. Think creatively about, how could I use this when I'm cooking up muffins or throwing it in a bread or making crackers. So
Yeah, what
it's a
would you do with
mindset more
those?
than it. We are so privileged. Huh? What's that?
What
I'm
would you do
sorry, I
with the
missed what you
shreds of
said.
shredded wheat at the bottom of the bag?
Yeah, yeah. So I save them, I stick them in the fridge, and when I've accumulated a cup or two of shreds, then I most typically, toss them into, because it's wonderful fiber. It's certainly great. I toss it into a bread that I'm making. I make it sourdough breads. It's just something I do on occasion. Or I roll them into crackers, which are really easy to do, and delicious. So, and certainly are zero fat and high fiber, so wonderful whole grain crackers that one can make. You can use them in crepes, you can put them in your pancakes, or your waffles. There's lots of ways to just begin to think about foods differently, so that we can just be more mindful. We've grown up in such a privileged generation or two. We don't think about frugality. It's really, not typical for most people. My husband is from Italy. I grew up there, and we spent years in Italy, and lived there for a couple of years, in fact. And when I was living with his family, I was just really intrigued by his grandmother and his mother's recycling of everything in the kitchen. They had grown up during the war and gone through some really tough times in Europe, as many people all over the world have, at various points. And this is how our ancestors really were. And so when they had a little bit of sauce or gravy or anything left over, it just went into a little cup that went in the fridge, and then was the foundation for some delicious dish the following day. So it's really just beginning to think more in terms of conservation and using our food as a precious commodity instead of a wasteful one.
Well, before we jump into some of the delicious recipes that are in the book, a couple of other things that I want to bring up is number one, in the book, you do a great job of calculating the impact that your recipes will have on the environment. But before we get to that, like, let's kind of set the plate there, and let me ask you, by and large, just in terms of a carbon footprint and the effect on the environment, can you compare for us, say, somebody who goes through the drive-through for breakfast, gets a sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit, maybe some hash browns, a cup of coffee, something like that, versus somebody who might be eating oatmeal with fruit at home for breakfast? What is the savings in terms of eating at home, in terms of the carbon emissions there?
Well, of course, with a hypothetical, it's difficult to be really specific. I gathered all of
Ballpark it.
that carbon footprint. Every recipe, just so people know, every recipe has a, a snapshot of a key ingredient in a dish, what its carbon footprint would be. That is, at every point along the supply chain, how much is generated by land use or agricultural practices or transportation or packaging and on and on and on. So you can see what are the drivers for that particular ingredient in a particular country in real time. That came from the wonderful platform uh, um, carboncloud.com, which is a Swedish company that works with food producers and retailers all over the world, helping them reduce their climate footprints for their commodities. And you can the information is available to all of us, and this is used with their permission. So I give it as a way to just make us more aware of what the footprint of different ingredients are. But for your hypothetical, it would be, I can just tell you, it would be an enormous difference because in a fast food drive through, you're not only most likely looking at animal, a burger and fries. So you've got processed foods are high emitting foods. Plus, you've got livestock, meat products, which are on the top of the list in terms of the top emitters. So you're paying dearly for the climate, to have your fast food meal. Meanwhile, if you were producing or eating, greens and beans or a plant-based salad or burritos or whatever you might want to do at home, just home cooking in and of itself is just so much less impacting. And when you're sourcing your ingredients uh, from plants and you're sourcing them unprocessed and you're sourcing them sustainably, you are doing the maximum. So I can't give you an exact number, but I can just tell you the difference would be enormous in terms of the impact of even that individual meal.
Well, and I've said this many times on the show, Kathy, and that is that one of my favorite things about eating this way is that it doesn't
Oops.
mean that you have to give up your favorite foods any longer. You just have to learn how to kind of replicate those flavors. You can get creative in the kitchen. And I know you, who spends an enormous amount of time in the kitchen, knows all about that. And I love the recipes that are in this book because if you are a fan of burgers, well, guess who's got burgers in the book? You do, my friend. Can you walk us through some of your favorites that are in this book? I think that would be a lot of fun.
So this is the cover of the book. So, oops.
Yep, got it right here.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's start. So here's my mango salsa. So this is just a really lively and very cheerful and beautiful dish. It can work with South Asian cooking, like a chutney, or with Latino dishes and Mexican specifically as a salsa. But it can go on top of your burgers, or you can have it with chips. And it's with mangoes, and there's a little bit of Thai chili for a little bit of a buzz there, and tomatoes, onions, cilantro. There's ginger in here and lime, and so really, really tasty and comes together really, really quickly. You can use frozen mangoes. Really makes it easy. I love this recipe. This is one of my original soups. I call it artichoke. I'm sorry, asparagus. This is an asparagus recoup soup. And I call it a recoup soup because it's typically when we're cooking asparagus, those woody, hard bottoms to the asparagus often get broken off and, tossed in the landfill. But here I'm using specifically those pieces of the asparagus. And when you cook them properly and you can blend them in a blender with some seasonings, you have the most velvety, creamy, delicious cream soup imaginable. It's just so delicate and flavorful. I really, really love it. And here I have it with some chives and a little bit of chili threads, which are just fun to play with there, and some homemade croutons. Let's see. But you can do the same technique with the stems of your hearty greens, your collards, your kale, and so forth. They'll be stronger flavored, but delicious. Or with the cores of broccoli or cauliflower, any place that parts of the plant you might not be using typically, but we can and we should. Salads get short shrift in the plant-based world, I think, or in the world in general, I really should say, because people, they make salads, they think, oh, I'm just going to toss some greens on a plate and maybe with a little bit of cucumber or tomato, and boom, that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's so boring. And salads can be really the focal point of your meal and really exciting. And this is my roasted baby beets with citrus salad. It's wonderful for this time of the year in the fall. So it's got roasted yellow, golden beets and regular beets, and it's got grapefruit and mandarin oranges. We got some peppery arugula and radishes would add a little bite, and shallots and some pistachios. And then I have it, just with those little white specks are labneh made from soy yogurt, which is like a creamy cheese, a yogurt cheese that you can just dot on the top of it. It doesn't even need dressing, but I do provide a yogurt-based dressing for anybody that wants one. But it's so flavorful and delicious, exciting to eat your salads when you get imaginative. This is another great fall and winter dish. This is my brassica biscuit bake. So on a plant-based, with bitter buttermilk, I make a wonderful cultured buttermilk, which is so delicious and creamy with just a little bit of tang. And I use that to make a biscuit to be the foundation for these brassicas that are really sweeten up just after the first frost come. Makes a really delicious dish with a creamy white sauce, all plant-based, of course. And that just is a casserole, but it's really a fun entree to have. Here, totally different. This is a Middle Eastern dish, hails from Palestine and Lebanon and Syria. It's called manazale. And manazale is with eggplants and tomatoes and chickpeas. It's just really wonderful, delicious dish. And it's flavored with a Tunisian spice blend called berber, which makes it, really elevates it to a different level. It's a spice. I give a recipe for the cookbook in my first chapter on seasonings. And once you have it, you can use it in all sorts of dishes to really flavor and liven up your dishes. And it really brings your manazale to new heights. It's a wonderful entree. And then we get to some sweets because, hey, we all need a little bit of sweetness in our lives. And this is a French dessert, normally made with white flour and sugar and cream and butter and all the things we are not going to be using. Instead, this is a clafoutis, it's called. It's really a baked custard on a little bit of a light crust. It's a gluten-free oat crust here. And the custard is made with tofu and soy yogurt and so forth. And this is with Rainier cherries, but it works with any kind of cherries or apricots. All the spring fruits work really beautifully, or even berries you can use. And it's just such a delectable dessert. And here it's topped with a little creme fraiche that I also make from soy yogurt very easily. And lastly, I have my pretty apple packets, wonderful for this time of year when apples are really coming into the fray. And it's just a little fanciful, tied up with a bow here, made out of dough. It's just slightly sweetened dough that I laminated with some apricot, apricot paste that I just reconstitute from unsulfured apricots, and sliced apple. And it's just, there's a little diagram how to you roll out your dough and you cut them in squares. And it's very simple just to tie it up like a little package to present to your guests or your family. And so that's pretty much it. And anyway, just to give you a sneak peek of some of what the cookbook is all about in terms of what it its recipes.
That last one was beautifully packaged. Like, I have never seen apples baked quite like that. That looked absolutely amazing. I'm on board with that. And the salad in there. I mean, that did not look like a salad to me. That looked like a masterpiece of a meal. I mean, there's so many vibrant colors that were just popping off of the plate to
Oh,
get you. And listen, fellas, for the football lovers like myself, the sports nuts. All right. We got some man food in here too. We've got beady burgers. We've got black and red bean chili. Yes, please. Sloppy Joes, if that's your jam. We've got that in the book for you as well. You really have put a little something for everyone in here, Cathy.
I hope so. It's for people that have never cooked before in their lives. So it's, there are a lot of easy, very accessible recipes, but it also gives some breadth so that if people want to, there's a celebrations chapter for those people for special occasions that want to put a little more time into things, but nothing major. And yeah, hopefully people will get a lot of joy out of it. It's 100 corporations are really generate about 70 something percent of greenhouse gas emissions. But in their sectors, whether it's fossil fuels or cement, they only really are responsible for 12% of direct emissions. That 88% that's left over is what consumers consume, what we buy. That's what is generating so many of these emissions. And we have agency, we have power. We don't realize it, but we do as consumers. We exist in social circles, we have friends and neighbors and relatives and our work colleagues. So we all collectively can make an enormous difference when we eat for the planet and start with our forks. It's the I didn't even mention this, but when we switch our eating preferences in the direction of plants and away from animal products and highly processed foods, we can have an enormous effect. And when we go all the way, we have the potential to reduce our individual climate footprint by a whopping 75%. It's enormous, the potential. So my hope is that all our choices will impact collectively consumer demand, because that will dictate what producers produce. And that can really bridge the gap that we have with emissions rising, with our leaders are not getting us to where we need to get to in time, but we need to take matters into our own hand and buy us time for these other effects to come on board, which they will, but to keep us from reaching tipping points in the climate, which will accelerate climate change even more dramatically than anything we've seen today. And we're so close. We have just a small amount of time to really make a difference. So that's why this book, and that's why I hope people will be motivated to and excited to eat for the planet, eat for themselves, for the animals. We didn't even talk about wildlife, but the impact of wildlife is enormous potentially. And they really need our help right now because they're in a free fall, those populations. So I hope
Well,
that's
listen,
helpful.
a lot of great stuff in this book, a lot of great recipes. Yeah, it's very, very helpful. And there's just so much here. The book, Love the Foods That Love the Planet, Recipes to Cool the Climate and Excite the Senses. There is a link right down below, my friends, in the show description for you to go ahead and click and pick up your copy. Do a lot of good for the planet and a heck of a lot of good for your taste buds as well. Cathy, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Chuck. I've enjoyed it. And thank you so much for spreading the word.